Welcome everyone to this service this morning, and so good to see all of you here. I'm Ann Marinello, and I'll be assisting with this service today. Our pastor, Reverend Dr. Leon Dunkley, will deliver today's reflection, I'm happy to say. And its title is An American Peace of Mind. I do have a few announcements to start with. If you're new to the North Chapel, or if you're visiting, please consider signing in the guest book at the back of the sanctuary. If there's anyone here who would like to introduce themselves, we'd be more than glad to have you do that, but you don't need to. In terms of COVID precautions, we've been on various levels. I almost think of them as the red, yellow, green. And we've progressed from red to yellow to green, and now we're back in yellow. I think that we can, we're keeping masks on, but we are singing rather than humming now. So, and we're not singing real loudly, but we are keeping them on, even for doing joys and concerns. I'll be taking mine off when I'm up here because of the distance. So thank you for that. I'm trying to maintain distance from each other also. We're still not having a formal coffee hour, but we have been offering lemonade outside. I don't know after the service if we have someone doing that or not, but yay, thank you. So we'll go out that way and past the front porch and onto the lawn and have some lemonade afterwards. There's also a number of important announcements in the program, which I won't bore you with reading, but choir is restarting, and the information on that is in here starting September 8th, 4 to 5:30 in the afternoon. We're collecting for food shelf still. Next Sunday, it's important to remember that our service will be up at the Barnard Church in Silver Lake. So don't come here. And bring your bathing suit and towel if you'd like to get a sandwich and go swimming afterwards. Hopefully it'll be another beautiful day. Ann Winnie is looking for cucumbers, planning ahead for the red flannel hash, so if people have those, you can talk with her about that. Wednesday, we're having lunches down by the river. Everyone's invited. And Sherry Belisle is going to just say a word about the upcoming book group so that you know what they're discussing. Is she here? There you are. If you want to just take a minute to tell us.
If you're a reader, book clubs are the place to be. It's just so much fun to talk about books. And book clubs usually, certainly ours, is you can come once. You can come once every 6 months. You can come whenever you want. But if you don't want to read a book, that's okay too. This one coming up, we're talking about September 15th, and Their Eyes Are Watching God is just rich with language. Such beautiful language, even if there wasn't a plot. So we welcome you. On the back, it says to contact David Parker, but please contact me, Sherry Belisle, so we can include you in the Zoom. Thank you.
And Leon also has an announcement.
Just a quick announcement. I'm going to be running an informal gathering right after service today in the parlors. There's an excerpt from an Aaron Sorkin screenplay. It's about a 5-minute thing that I want to play and then try to figure out what it means for us and how to plan an event around it. So if you're feeling creative and analytical, come and stay after the church, and we'll just have a brief meeting of about 20 minutes or so. Okay, thank you so much.
Sounds fascinating. And this would be a good time, if you haven't already, to turn off your cell phone or put them in silent mode. Our opening words this morning: we gather in worship to find meaning and live more deeply. Worship creates connection within, among, and beyond us, calling us to be to our better selves, calling us to live with wisdom and compassion. This morning, I'm going to read an excerpt from the lyrics of The Story of a Life by Harry Chapin. And Leon sent this excerpt to me, and it's a building block of our discussion that he'll be presenting later on this morning. It was really interesting because I hadn't thought of Harry Chapin in so long, but do remember having gone to a concert. And it turns out he died in 1981, so it was that long ago that it was a few years before that. But I remember going to Okemo to an outside concert to listen to Harry Chapin. But anyway, this is Story of a Life. I can see myself. It's a golden sunrise. Young boy, open up your eyes. It's supposed to be your day. Now off you go to horizon bound, and you won't stop until you've found your own kind of way. And the wind will whip your tousled hair, the sun, the rain, the sweet despair. Great tales of love and strife, and somewhere on your path to glory, you will write the story of a life. And all the towns that you walk through and all the people that you talk to sing you their songs. And there are times you change your stride. There are times you can't decide, and still you go on. And then the young girls dance their gypsy tunes and share their secrets of the moon. So soon you find a wife, and though she sees your dreams go poorly, still she joins your story of a life.
Good morning and good Sunday. I hope that this new day finds you well. To all souls I say, it's good to be together. This morning's reflection is entitled American Peace of Mind, P-E-A-C-E. A poet and a friend and a Unitarian Universalist minister named Rick Maston used to tell me rhyming stories sometimes that troubled me a little bit. He wrote these beautiful poems that left me strangely dissatisfied, a little uneasy sometimes, because they didn't resolve so clearly, not as clearly as I wanted them to. He shared a rhyming story about a man who struggled with his mental health. This poem was called Another Kind of Noah. It was about a man named Marv, a nutty old friend of his. As he would say, old nutty Marv, who lived his life with one shoe on and one shoe off, coloring outside the so-called normal lines in life. Old nutty Marv, who limped in his mind, insanely rhyming things that mattered to him most, confessing his deep and abiding passion for the artists in general, for painters in particular, especially the colorful and edgy ones like Paul Gauguin and Vincent van Gogh. Gauguin, who struggled against drug addiction in his time, and Van Gogh, who suffered for his sanity. Rick Maston related to the challenges that these artists faced in life in an interesting way. He wrote, Paul Gauguin, watching through his window pane, his crazy friend Vincent, winding his head up in gauze, knowing the hurt to be the very ground in which art grows, and far better for him at least than filling the galleries with slick paintings of wet city streets, colors reflecting, or of little kids with big sad eyes at $50 a throw. And though it seems unfair of me, I need him there at sea adrift, tending his mad menagerie, another kind of Noah. I need him there, dropping me a line each time I fall into that awful blue period of mine. Each of us has a gift that we can give to the world. Some gifts are modest and others are precious. Some of our gifts are quite profound. Every gift is holy, and no gift truly costs us in any way. There is a religious way of saying this. There's a Christian way. It is the kingdom of God is within us and is everywhere around us, and everywhere we go, we carry a little piece of heaven. Our gift is that little piece of heaven. It should come as no surprise, though, that heaven is not the exclusive lair of Democrats. Nor does it belong to men, or to wealthy people, or to any group. All of us are welcomed, and all of us are called to be at our best. In this sense, heaven is a radical idea that we are responsible for the beauties that we carry. We are responsible for the beauty that we carry, no one else. And we owe that little piece of heaven, we owe that beauty to every gorgeous moment, even if they end in tears. We owe that piece of beauty to the grace that we hold, to the patience that we have, and to the generosity of our hearts. We owe that little piece of heaven that we carry to ourselves, and we owe that little piece of heaven to one another. Can I ask, Kristen, can you do me a favor? Can you let her know that she can bring the kids back to Adrian? And they can all play together. Thank you. We can share the gifts we carry with the world in which we live. Of course, there is no American piece of heaven, P-I-E-C-E. I realize that there is no region or realm, there's no quadrant or quarter, no zone of enclosure that is uniquely prepared for us as Americans in some way. I realize this, but I wonder about the possibility of an American peace of mind, P-E-A-C-E. Not somewhere up in heaven, there and then, but here on earth, here and now. I wonder about that, especially with all the troubles that we've been going through in our country. You know, I've discovered something that doesn't make me laugh. I've discovered that President Joe Biden is not all that funny. Last week I watched the speeches of this year's White House Correspondents' Dinner. I was looking for some political levity, and I wanted to find some American peace of mind. I soon enough discovered Trevor Noah. Trevor Noah is the comedian who delivered the most honored address at that evening's gathering. A room chock full of seasoned journalists in tuxedos and fancy evening gowns sat together and listened to a young biracial South African man roast the president and the media that covers his actions. They sat together in a mix of laughter and anxiety, comfort and displeasure to what I believe was a timely and moving message from a far more funnier man. President Biden spoke before Trevor Noah did. A gracious host invited him to the podium, and Joe Biden said, "Thank you for that introduction, and a special thanks to the 42% of you who actually applauded. I am excited to be here tonight with you, the only group of Americans with a lower approval rating than I have." Joe Biden's numbers were down despite his being on the eve of great achievement. The president continued. He said, "This is the first time the president has attended this dinner in 6 years, and it's understandable. I mean, we had a horrible plague, followed by 2 years of COVID. Just imagine if my predecessor came up to this dinner this year. Now that would have been a real coup." And there were groans from the gathered assembly. I liked it best when President Joe Biden put the jeers and the jokes aside and reminded us all that American politics is not reality TV, and toward the end of his remarks, he said, "Let me conclude with a serious word. We live in serious times. Overseas, the liberal world order that laid the foundation for global peace, stability, and prosperity since World War II is genuinely and seriously under assault. And at home, a poison is running through our democracy." He was talking about the massive and the dangerous influx of disinformation that creates an environment where truth is buried by lies and lies live on as truth. We have forgotten how to speak with one another. Has our language become so foolish and unintelligible? Have we forgotten how to see that little piece of heaven that each of us carries inside? Have we forgotten how to make that little piece of heaven manifest? Trevor Noah took over from there. Noah is the current host of The Daily Show. He took over after Jon Stewart left. He's only 38 years young, but he did just fine under all the pressure. Trevor Noah roasted everyone. He began by roasting Jeffrey Toobin for being inappropriate on a Zoom call. And then he roasted Tucker Carlson and Kristen Sinema. He roasted Kellyanne Conway by way of Will Smith and what happened at the Oscars recently. He wondered anxiously, as if to himself, what if I make like a really mean joke, about like Kellyanne Conway, and her husband rushes up to the stage and thanks me? Kellyanne Conway was deeply committed to the former president and was situated highly in his administration. Her husband, George Conway, is also political but not nearly committed. In fact, George Conway is radically unsupportive of the former president, and that was the backstory that made Trevor's inside joke so funny. The backstory is what bridges the divide between us and keeps us all connected. Now, there's a book called Backstory. Do you know it? It's called Backstory. It was written by a guy named Ken Auletta. I think that Ken Auletta used to be the ombudsman for the New York Times, but you can check me on that. In any case, he is known in the media business as America's foremost journalism analyst. He believes that journalism is incredibly important, and his book asks great questions. I'm quoting him. He says, "Didn't reporters brave Bull Connor's dogs to report on the struggle for civil rights? Didn't the New York Times face down President Kennedy when we wanted an investigative journalist to get yanked from Vietnam? Didn't the Washington Post back 2 cub reporters over an incident known as Watergate?" Jersey accent just came out. Watergate, did you hear that? Watergate. "I saw how young writers," he says, "perfected something that they called new journalism. This was a profession that could both educate and entertain," end quote. It's important to know the backstory if we want to be included in life. We need a certain amount of backstory in order to get the joke. So if you don't know what happened at the Oscars, what Trevor Noah said isn't funny. If we don't know that Chris Rock was roasting Jada Pinkett Smith when her husband, Will Smith, became angry and rose from his seat, approached Chris Rock on stage directly and slapped Chris Rock across his face on live TV. When we don't have the backstory, we don't understand that Trevor Noah's anxiety. George Conway, Kellyanne's husband, might rush the stage and thank him. I'm sorry to belabor the humor, it's just that the backstory is so important. Remaining connected with one another is so very important these days. Trevor Noah roasted everyone. Jeffrey Toobin and Tucker Carlson, Kristen Sinema and Kellyanne Conway, Chris Cuomo and Governor Greg Abbott of Texas, Meghan McCain by way of her father, and Madison Cawthorn of North Carolina. He mentioned Ron DeSantis twice, and not undeservedly. He mentioned Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Bernie Sanders of Vermont. He mentioned Matt Gaetz and his girlfriend. He mentioned Maggie Haberman and Jennifer Psaki. He gave a shout out to Joe and Micah out in Scarborough Country, to Peter Ducey and to Chris Wallace, to Abby Phillips and Yamashi Alcindor, to Mick Mulvaney, who assured everyone back in the day that Donald Trump would concede gracefully if he lost the election. A prediction that was, shall we say, inaccurate. He tipped his hat to the work of Anderson Cooper and Don Lemon, Shepard Smith, and Chuck Todd. He saw Jonathan Swan was in the house. Caustic and biting and sometimes abrasive, Trevor Noah pulled down the veil for everyone. He stripped away the curtain as much as he possibly could in order to prepare the way for what was his closing statement. And what he said was so beautiful. He softened his voice, and he said to the room of incredibly well-dressed journalists, "Every single one of you is a bastion of democracy. And if you ever begin to doubt your responsibilities, look no further than what is happening in Ukraine. Look at what is happening there. Journalists are risking and even losing their lives to show the world what is really happening. You realize how amazing this is. Like in America, you have the right to seek the truth and speak the truth, even if it makes people in power uncomfortable, even if it makes your viewers or your readers uncomfortable. Do you understand how amazing that is? I stood here tonight and made fun of the President of the United States, and I'm going to be fine." And he looked nervously over his shoulder. Do you understand what a blessing this is? A slideshow had been presented just before Trevor Noah took the podium. A slideshow honoring the deaths of journalists whose lives were lost in the preceding 2 months while they were reporting on Ukraine. Their faces were displayed and their names made known to the gathered assembly: Maxim Levin, Roman Nezaboritz, Vera Heinrich, Brent Renault, Oksana Polina, Yevgeny Sakun, Zorislav Simoski, Pierre Zakruski, Alexandra or Sasha Krushainova. So when Trevor Noah made his closing remarks, his words were so very poignant. He said, "Honestly ask yourself this question. If Russian journalists are losing their livelihoods and losing their freedom for daring to report on what their own governments are doing, if they had the freedom to write any words, to show any stories, to ask any questions, if they had basically what you have, would they be using it in the same way that you do?" Ask yourself that question every day, because you have one of the most important roles in the world. Soon after Trevor Noah's address, the White House Correspondents' Dinner ended and the journalists were scattered in the wind. Journalists have the role of telling a story of our lives, which is hard because we don't understand ourselves very well these days. Journalists have the role of telling the backstory and of filling us in, of letting us in on the joke and keeping us together as a community. Remaining connected to one another is so very important these days. It means everything, because it is so easy for daring to report on what their own governments are doing. If they had the freedom to write any words, to show any stories, to ask any questions, if they had basically what you have, would they be using it in the same way that you do? Ask yourself that question every day, because you have one of the most important roles in the world. Soon after Trevor Noah's address, the White House Correspondents' Dinner ended and the journalists were scattered in the wind. Journalists have the role of telling a story of our lives, which is hard because we don't understand ourselves very well these days. Journalists have the role of telling the backstory and of filling us in, of letting us in on the joke and keeping us together as a community. Remaining connected to one another is so very important these days. It means everything, because it is so easy for us to become confused. The wisdom teaching tells us that long ago there was another Noah, not Trevor Noah, and not the Noah that Rick Maston wrote the poem about, but an ancient Noah in the book of Genesis. Noah, who was called upon to build the ark and who filled it 2 by 2. The Noah, who with his family survived the great big global flood. Noah, who saw the rainbow sign and received the olive branch carried by a dove. The Noah whose many descendants repopulated the world that God made new. As the good book says, Scripture tells us that at this time the whole earth had just one language and that the people migrated from the east and settled in a land called Shinar, and that they built a great city there, and that in the city they built a great tower, and the tower had its top in the heavens. The people of that city wanted to make a name for themselves. They wanted to distinguish themselves. They expressed an excessive pride. The city of Babel and its tower were impressive, but God was concerned about the arrogance that he saw. So God confused their language so that they could not understand one another, and then he scattered them across the world. Now, we may not be biblical scholars here, but the story of the Tower of Babel is not unfamiliar to us. It's an important story in light of what's been happening to us these days. Our arrogance and our pride are so excessive that sometimes we don't even want to talk to one another. And it isn't God who has confused our language. It is that we are doing this to ourselves, and we're writing books like this one, How to Talk to a Liberal If You Must. It's a waste of time. To be honest, I'm just how antithetical to our larger project, how insulting and how corrosive to our American peace of mind. My dear Ann Coulter, you can do so much better than this. Trevor Noah said, honestly ask yourself this question. If Russian journalists who are losing their lives for daring to report on what their own governments are doing, if they had the freedom to write any words, to show any stories, or to ask any questions, if they had what you have, would they be using it in the same way that you do? Ask yourself this question every day, because you have one of the most important roles in the world. No, okay, I get it. Some of us as storytellers aren't journalists. And yes, there is room enough even for Ann Coulter's acerbic wit in our larger circle, but there must be a common language, lest we all as a people not make our way to the promised land, but be scattered to the winds, like the descendants of Noah. Because right now in this country, we are desperately and deeply misunderstanding one another. Now, journalists may not have built prideful towers in the centers of our cities, but corporations for which the journalists are writing certainly have. They've built these towers and they speak different languages to specific audiences. We have been slowly learning how to speak the languages of TV networks and cable news channels. We speak the languages of ABC and CBS and MSNBC, in the mother tongues of Fox News and Democracy Now!, in the parlance of PBS NewsHour and National Public Radio. We speak in the early morning dialects of Barbara Walters and Whoopi Goldberg, and in the late night lingo of Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert. We argue in different languages with different sensibilities. Those who speak the conservative language called Sean Hannity's rail against those who speak the liberal language called Rachel Maddow's on a regular basis in lieu of the language of Walter Cronkite. The common ground is so embattled. The common good is lost in translation, and no one spans the distance anymore, and it's hurting us. It's costing us our sense of connectedness. Senator Cheney just lost her primary in Wyoming. She knew that she was going to lose her seat, and in her concession speech, she said, 2 years ago, I won this primary with 73% of the vote. I could have easily done the same again this year. The path was clear, but she couldn't do it. Not without compromising that little piece of heaven that she holds inside. She said, no seat, no office in this land is more important than the principles that we are sworn to protect, and I well understood the potential of political consequences of abiding by my duty. This primary election is over, but now the real work begins. Are we ready for it? Or do we want to keep fighting with one another in useless ways? Are we ready to honor the little pieces of heaven and our American peace of mind, or will we choose to become confused, babbling foolishly and incoherently? Harry Chapin, in the song called A Story of a Life, concluded the song by saying, sometimes words can serve me well, and sometimes words can go to hell for all that they do. For every dream that took me high, there's been a dream that's passed me by. I know it's so true. Now, I'm afraid that this excerpt might leave you strangely dissatisfied, a little uneasy, because it doesn't resolve cleanly as we might wish that it were, but here we are. So it's 6-5 and pick 'em which way this one's gonna go. Honoring our American peace of mind or babbling in foolish incoherence. It might seem obvious, but babbling foolishly is pretty gratifying. In the short term, at least. It makes me feel like I'm better than other people. And I am not. Of course, in the long run, it doesn't pan out, so we'll just have to see. All I can do is leave you with a little poetry that does resolve. Some poetry that tries to make some sense of the picture on the cover of your orders of service this morning. The storyteller is David Wilcox, and his rhyming words were these: well, I don't look all that ragged for all the time it's been, but I'm weakened underneath me where my frame has rusted thin. And at this year's state inspection, I just barely passed. Won't you drive me across the country, boy? This year could be my last. I'm a tail-fin road locomotive from the days of cheap gasoline, and I'm for sale by the side of the road going nowhere, a rusty old American dream. I rolled off the line in Detroit back in 1958. I spent 3 days in the showroom. That's all I had to wait, and I've been good to all who've owned me, so have no fear. Come on, boy, put your money down and get me out of here. I'm a tail-fin road locomotive. Now, this car needs a young man to own him, one who will polish the chrome. And I can give you the rest of my lifetime, but don't let me die here alone. Just pump me some juice to my battery and give that old starter a spin. Hear me whir, sputter, backfire through the carburetor and roar into life once again. I'm a tail-fin road locomotive. And you can polish my chrome so clean, we can fly off into the sunset together, a rusty old American dream I'm still running. So it's not a perfect closing poem. There are obvious environmental flaws. The hope is that we might recover our senses of American grace and gratitude, that we might reclaim our senses of humility and peace of mind. The hope is that we suffer through some tragedy, some trauma, and some positive transformation. The tragedy and the trauma have befallen us already. We might as well make good use of it. The tail-fin road locomotives that we need right now are fully electric and solar driven. We'll have to pipe in the sound that satisfies. They greatly appreciate the fact that Vermont is improving its infrastructure, and they carry inside of them, safely protected, our collective dignity and decency. It is still possible for us to rediscover the common ground and the common good. It is still possible for us to dream American dreams, ones that nurture the best in us becoming possible. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.